Hello guys, welcome to the next session of developing e-commerce application from scratch using Angular and Spring Boot. Till now in the e-commerce application, we have done almost every single functionality that e-commerce application should have. We have worked on different features, we have worked on different views for the different roles such as admin and the users. But we have left back with one of the most important functionality, that is payment integration. So now in this session we are going to focus on how we can integrate any payment gateway in our e-commerce application. So for the payment gateway we have multiple options. We have Paytm, we have PayPal, and we have the Razorpay, and there are many more options available in the market. But right now for this series I'm just going to use a Razorpay. Let me just clear you one thing. This video is not sponsored by the Razorpay. The reason why I am using the Razorpay is due to its simplicity. I have used it a couple of times in my different applications. That is the reason I am just trying to use it in this application also. And second thing is, many of the people who are watching this series might be the beginners or might be just started learning the Angular and Spring Boot. So I think Razorpay is good option to start with because the code is really very less and we can just integrate the Razorpay in payment gateway in our application really very easily. So that is the reason I am just going to use a Razorpay. Maybe in future, if I get a chance and if I get a lot of comments, then in future I will try to use different payment gateways, and I will just try to show you how to use different payment gateways in a different applications. But now let's continue with this session. So before continuing with this session, make sure that you have watched my previous session, because in the last session we discussed on how we can create account on a Razorpay and how we can generate keys as well. So in this session we require those keys. So I'll just make sure that you have generated those keys and watch my previous session, and then maybe you can just continue with this particular session. Now again, to integrate this payment gateway, we require some changes at the back end and we require some changes at the front end also. I will try to cover all these changes in this same session itself, but session will become a bit large in terms of the minutes, but I think making it in a single video makes sense for me as of now. So now, without taking much more time, let me just take you to the IntelliJ and let's see how we can start the implementation of payment integration. Now over here, to start the payment integration, before that let me just go to the Google Chrome and let me just tell you how our application is looking like as of now. So as of now, let me just click with the user. So let me just click with the user, login with the user, and let me just do one thing. Let me just go to the home. Let me just go to the view details. Let me just click on buy now. So over here, whenever we will click on the place order, then order will get placed directly. So as of now, we don't have any payment and anything. So now what we are going to do is we are going to see how we can integrate the payment. So now to do this, let me just go to the IntelliJ and let me just first of all open the pom.xml file. So reason why I'm just using a pom.xml file is because we just need to add one new dependency, which is a Razorpay dependency. So that is the reason we have to add one dependency. So let me just go to this particular document. So this is the dependency that we have to use. I will just give all these details that I'm using in the description below. You can just check that out. So, and you can just copy and paste directly from description. Now let me just copy this dependency and let me just paste it over here. And now let me just save these changes. Now, as we have done some changes in the pom.xml, we have to use load Maven changes. So let me click on this particular button, that is Maven refresh button or Maven sync button. So it will just take some time and it will just try to download the dependencies of Razorpay. So let me just give a minute and make sure that your laptop or PC is connected to the internet, because it will try to pull all this dependency online. Now it is downloaded successfully. The next thing that we have to do is we have to first of all create one API. So now let me just, before writing the code, let me just tell you one thing. There are two steps involved while making the payments. So first of all, in the Razorpay, we have to prepare the order. So when I say order, it basically means that we have to prepare a transaction. So very first thing is we have to prepare a transaction, and second thing is we have to execute a transaction. So first of all, we require one API to prepare a transaction, and second step will be the like executing a transaction. So let's see how we can do this. So first of all, let me just go to the src main java, and then let me just go to the controller, and over here let me just go to the order detail controller. Now over here let me just do one thing. Let me just add one new API that is called as a public. As of now, let me just keep it as a void, and then let me just make it as a create transaction, something like this. Now over here this API is going to take one parameter which is nothing but a amount. So we have to give a amount as well, like for which amount we have to prepare a transaction. So let me just use one path variable. So let me just use @path variable, and let me just give the name. As of now, let me just keep the name blank. In a moment I will just give it, and let me just give the amount as double amount, something like this. Now let me just use, we can use post mapping, or might be we can use get mapping. As of now get mapping makes sense for me, so let me just use get mapping, and then let me just use slash create transaction slash, and we have to give a path variable. So let me just give the name as a amount. So let me just copy this name and let me just paste it inside these double quotes, something like this. Now we have to give this pre-authorize. So let me just copy it and let me just paste it over here, but I'm just going to allow it only for the user. So we have to use user, something like this. So user is nothing but a role. So I just want to allow this API to be used by the people who are having the role as a user, something like this. Now we are done with the controller. Next thing that we have to do is we have to just go to the service, and we have to write some logic. So let me just go to the order details service, and let me just write one new method over here. So let me just write public. As of now, let me just keep it as a void, and then let me just use create transaction, something like this, and let me just give amount as a parameter, something like this. Now over here what we have to do is, first of all we require four different things. So let me just tell you what are the different things that we require in order to prepare the transaction for Razorpay. So first of all, obviously we require the amount. Then second thing that we require is a currency. So we have to give a currency in which currency we are going to prepare the amount. It might be like US dollars, it might be like Indian rupees, or it might be any other currency as well. Then we have to give a key, like we have to give a key that we have generated in the last session on the Razorpay portal. So that key we require, and there is one more key that is called as a secret key. So we have to give that secret key also. So these are the four mandatory fields that we require in order to create a transaction in a Razorpay. Now for this, what I'm just going to do is, we already have the amount that we are receiving from our API. We have to create the currency key and secret key. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to create four different variables. So over here what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to use a private, then static, then final, and then let me just make it as a string. Then let me just give the name as key is equals to, and let me just go to my document. So over here, this is the key that I have received. Let me just copy it and let me just paste it over here. So if you just see, there are two columns, which is key ID and then key secret. So key ID is nothing but a key, and then second thing is key secret means nothing but a secret key. Now let me just create one more variable, and let me just give the name as key underscore secret, something like this, and let me just copy this secret key and let me just paste it over here, something like this. For the currency, let me just make one more variable and let me just give the name as currency, something like this. And for the currency, we have to give something like INR or if you are using dollars, US dollars, then you have to give a USD. So we have to give a short form of our currency. In my case, I'm just going to use INR, which is Indian rupees. Now let me just save these changes. Now let me just come back to my method that we have just created. The next thing that what we have to do is we have to do one thing. So we have to, like, first of all create one Razorpay client. So what we have to do is we have to just use Razorpay client. Let me just give one name. You can give any name. Let me just give Razorpay client itself, and then we have to create a Razorpay client object. Now over here in the constructor, basically we have to pass two different parameters. First of all, we have to pass our key, and then second parameter is nothing but a secret key, something like this. Now over here it is giving us the error. Let's see what is the error. So over here it is basically saying that you must have to handle the exception. So what we have to do is we have to write this in a try catch. So let me just write this in a try, and let me just catch the exception, something like this, and let me just use e.get message, something like this. And now let me just save these changes. Now what we have to do is there is one method on the Razorpay client that is called as a create. So that create method we have to call. So what we have to do, we have to use Razorpay client dot orders dot create. Now if you just see, the create method basically takes one parameter that is called as a JSON object. Now this JSON object we have to prepare, and that JSON object should contain the amount and currency information. So I'm just going to tell you how we have to prepare it. So first of all, we have to just use JSON object. Let me just find the correct one. Yes, so JSON object we have to use. Let me just give the name as JSON objects itself is equals to new JSON object, something like this. Now we have to do is what we have to do is we have to use JSON object dot put, and over here we have to pass two different parameters. First parameter is nothing but a key. First parameter is nothing but a like key, and the second parameter is nothing but a value. So now what is the key and what is the value? Let me just tell you one thing. So for the amount, key should be amount, something like this, and then what we have to do is we have to pass the actual amount, something like this. And similarly we have to pass a second JSON object value. So we have to pass a currency. So for the currency we have to write a key as a currency. Make sure you are just writing in the same way that I'm showing over here, and then whatever currency we have declared. So over here we have declared the currency. Oh, okay, so let me just make the spellings correctly. Currency. So let me just copy this same key and let me just paste it over here, something like this. So amount we are receiving in the method parameter, and currency we have declared above. And the next thing that we have to do is one more thing that we just left back is, so amount, for this amount we have to make amount into 100. So something like this. So reason why I'm just using into 100 is basically whatever amount that we will receive over here, it will be the smallest unit of a currency. So for example, if you are just trying to use dollars, so whatever amount that it will receive over here, let's suppose if you are just trying to make payment of $100, then over here the amount variable will contain the $100, right, or 100 as a value. But Razorpay will consider it as 100 cents. So it will always consider the smallest unit of a currency. So that is the reason we have to make it as a into 100. So that's in that way it will be like it will whatever amount that we required, the exact same amount it will be reflected in the Razorpay also. Similarly, if you are making like transaction in the Indian rupees, and if I just pass the value of 10,000, so it will not consider it as a 10,000, so it will consider it as a 10,000 paisa, and that is the reason we have to make it as a into 100, so that it will be considered as a 10,000 rupees again. So don't need to put a lot of logic over here. Whatever amount you are just giving, just make sure that you are just making into 100 over here, something like this. Now let me just copy this JSON object and let me just paste it over here, something like this. Now as soon as we will create the transaction, or as soon as we will just try to prepare the transaction, it will return us bunch of details. So let me just tell you what are the details it will return. But first of all, let me just try to put them in one variable. So let me just try to put them in a order. So now make sure that the order, because for the order we have different choices, but make sure that you are just using order object from the com.razorpay itself, because it is going to return us object of a order. So make sure that you are just trying to import it from the com.razorpay, something like this. And let me just give order is equals to razorpay client.orders.create in the bracket JSON object, something like this. And lastly, what we can just do is we can just use system.out.println and let me just use order, something like this. So as of now, I'm just going to print these order details on the system.out with the help of system.out.println. In a moment, we are going to change the implementation and we are just going to return some details to the UI. But as of now, let me just save these changes and let me just start this application in a debug mode. Let's see what is what exactly happens when we try to send these details. Meanwhile, let me just open the Postman, because we are just going to try this particular API from the Postman. So if I just come back, and meanwhile let me just tell you one thing. What we have to do is we have to first of all log in with the user. Yeah, and one more thing that we just left back. Yes, so what we have to do is we have to just call order detail service dot create transaction from our controller, something like this. And now let me just save these changes, and now let me just restart the application again. Let's see what happens. And let me just do one thing. Let me just come back and let me just copy this API and let me just make it as a localhost :9090, and let me just paste it as a create transaction. And over here we have to give the amount, and let me just give it as 1,000 rupees. So let's say if I'm just going to create a transaction for 1,000 rupees, so we have to give it as 1,000, something like this. And one more thing, as this particular API is only available for the user, we have to pass a valid JWT token. So let me just prepare a JWT token also. So let me just try to use users credential. So let me just try to use username and password, something like this. And let me just copy this JWT token and let me just come back to my create transaction. Let me just go to the headers. Let me just pass one header that is called as authorization. Let me pass the value as bearer space. Let me just paste my JWT token. Now let me just come back to the IntelliJ and let me just put one debug point on this line number 106 and let's see what happens. So let me just click on send. Now we are able to get the endpoint on our line number 106. Let's go to the next. Yes. So now over here it will try to create object of Razorpay client. Yes, object is created. Now it will just try to create a order or create a transaction, and after creating transaction it should return us some order details, right? So let me just see whether we are get order details or not. Yes, now if you just see, we got lot of order details. So we got if I just show you, okay, so if I just open my debug and if I just show you over here, so here also like we have the amount, and let me just do one thing. Yes, so over here we have received a amount, then we have received amount pay as 0, then there are some other details. Currency, if you just see, there is INR and there are different details also. So now there are multiple details that we have received over here, but we have few details really very important that we require on the UI. So what we are going to do is we are just going to send some details to the UI. So what are those? Let me just do one thing. Let me just create one new method that is called as a, let me just stop debugging. So let me just create one new method that is called as a prepare private void and prepare transaction details, something like this, transaction details, something like this. It will just take object of orders. Order again will come from com.razorpay, something like this. Now from this order, what we are going to do is we are just going to fetch some details. So what we are going to do is we just require string order id is equals to order dot get, and we have to pass is id as a key. Then similarly we require currency, so we have to just use currency over here, something like this, and we can just store it in a currency, something like this. And similarly we can just do one thing, we can just take a amount also, so we have to use amount as a key, and we have to just create one new variable that is called as amount, something like this. Now over here we have to return these three values to the UI. So what we can just do is we can just go to the entity and we can just try to create one new Java class, and we can just give the name as transaction details, something like this. Now it should take three different variables. Let me just make it as a private, then string, then order id, then private string currency, and then private string, then we have to give it as a amount, something like this. And then one more thing, for the amount we can use maybe string or double or integer, that whatever you want. What I'm just going to do is I'm just going to keep it as a string only. Then what we can just do is we can generate constructor using these three parameters, and alongside we can generate a getters setters as well. So let me just use generate getters and setters, something like this. Let me just save these changes. Let me just come back to the order details service. Let me just do one thing, let me just create object of transaction details. Transaction details is equals to new transaction details. Now there are three different things that we have to pass. First one is a order id, then second one is a currency, and then third one is a amount, something like this. And now whatever we will prepare, we will just try to return the transaction details, something like this. Now over here it is complaining me because I have just given the return type as a void. So let me just make it as a transaction details. Now this particular method that we have just created, let me just call this method from our create transaction method. So let me just make it as a prepare transaction details, and let me just pass the order as a parameter. And let me just do one thing, let me just try to return it as it is. So whatever prepare transaction detail method will return, that as it is we are just going to return from this create transaction method also. Again it is complaining because we have used a return type as a transaction details. And one more thing, at the end we have to just return null, something like this, because if at all we get any exception and if at all this return statement doesn't execute, then this return statement should execute, something like this. Now let me just save it and let me just go to the controller. Again what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to write return in front of my create transaction method. So this basically means that whatever create transaction method will return to my controller as it is, I'm just going to return it from the controller. So again let me just give the type as a transaction details, something like this. And now let me just save these changes. Let me just start my application and let's see what happens, whether we are able to get any details on the postman or not. So let me just click on send again. Let's see what happens. So now over here in the postman we are just not getting any response. So let's see what we have done wrong over here. Okay, so let me just save these changes again. I'm not sure whether I saved this file or not, and let me just restart the application. This time let's see whether we get any output or not. Okay, so still we are not getting the expected output. So let's see what is happening over here. I will just do what I will just do. One thing is I will just do store it in a transaction detail is equals to something like this, and I will just try to return the transaction detail something like this, and I will put the debug point over here something like this. And now let me just restart the application and let's see how it looks like. Maybe I think we might getting any exception also. Let's see. Okay, so let me just come to the next line. Yes. Okay, so order is basically created. We are able to create the order successfully. Then okay, so now over here we are getting one exception. So exception is basically saying that it is basically class cast exception. So it is basically coming from the coming for the amount. So over here what we are just trying to do is we are just trying to store the amount in a string. We have to store it in an integer. So let me just give the integer something like this, and now we have to change the amount type in a class also something like this, and we have to change the getter setters also. So let me just remove these getter setters and let me generate a new one something like this. And now let me just save all these changes and let me just restart the application, and let's see. Now this time we should get some details on our Postman console itself. Yes, now we are getting the expected result. We are getting like we are getting the order ID, we are getting the currency, and we are getting the amount also. So now every single thing is looking perfectly fine. At the backend side, as of now we are done. Now we have to see all the changes that we have to do on the UI side also. So let's see how we can do those changes on the UI side. So on the UI, what we have to do is, first of all, whatever the API that we have created, we just have to call this particular API. So let me just go to the VS Code and let me just do one thing. Let me just go to the services and let me just go to the product.service.ts, and then let me just add one more service point over here. So let me just use public and let me just make it as a create transaction, and over here we have to just pass a amount, and then what we have to do is we have to just use return this.http client dot, it was a get mapping, so we have to use a get mapping, and then what we have to do is we have to just give endpoint API, that is http ://localhost 9090 / let me just go to the Postman, let me just copy the endpoint name, which is a create transaction, let me just give a slash, and whatever amount that we will receive, we have to just append that particular amount, something like this. Now let me just save these changes and let me just take you to the browser again, and what we have to do is we have to first of all find which method gets clicked on this place order button, and then whenever we will click on this particular button, then we have to call the API that we have just created. So for this, let me just go to the VS Code and let me just go to the byproduct.component.html file, and then let me just find the place order button. So yes, this is the place order button, and on this submit we call one method that is called as a place order. So now let me just do one thing, let me just change the method over here. Let me just, as of now, let me just call it as a, let's suppose create transaction, and place order, something like this. And now let me just copy this name, because this method is now not yet created. That is the reason we are getting error over here. Let me just go to the byproduct.component.ts and let me just try to create this method. This method will take form, order form as a parameter, something like this, which is of type ng form, something like this. And let me just give the curly bracket. Now this order form is basically nothing but this particular parameter that we are sending over here. The next thing that we have to do is we have to just first of all create a transaction. How we are going to do is we have to just use this dot product service dot, then we have to call create transaction, and this create transaction basically takes amount as a parameter. Now if you just see, there is one method which gives us the grand total. So grand total is nothing but this particular total. So in some cases, let's suppose we have where we have multiple products, 5 to 10 products, then the grand total will be the total which will be calculating for all the different products and all the different total of all the different products, which will be a grand total, right? So this particular method calculate a grand total. So we have to call this particular method over here. Let's see, this dot grand total, something like this, and let me just store it into a variable. Let me just make it as a let amount is equals to this dot grand total. Now this particular amount, that whatever we will receive, we will just send it to the create transaction, and then we will just make it as a subscribe. Now we have to add two callbacks, first one for the success response and then second one for the error response. So let me just add response, then arrow, and then let me just make it as a console.log response, something like this. And then we have to give a comma and we have to give error callback. So let me just use console.log error, something like this. And now let me just save these changes. Let's see what happens on the UI when we just try to do the console. So let me just go to the console and let me just do one thing. Let me just clear the console, and now let me just put some details over here, some random details I'm just putting. As of now, I'm not interested in these details. I'm interested in the whatever output that we will receive. So let me click on place order. So yes, we received the order ID, we received the currency, and we received the amount as well. The next thing that we have to do is we can just try to use this particular response, and we can just try to do further operations. Now if you just remember, in very initial stage of the video, I just told you two different steps, right? The very first step is to prepare a transaction or to create a transaction, and then second step is executing a transaction. So whatever we have done till now, it was basically about preparing a transaction. Now the second step that we are actually going to perform is all about executing a transaction. So let's see how we can execute and finalize the transaction. Okay, so one thing that we have to do is, let me just go to my notes. Yes, so this is dependency that we have to add in our package.json. So this is again nothing but a Razorpay dependency. So let me just go copy this and let me just go to the package.json file, and let me just paste it inside my dependencies, something like this. And now let me just save this. Now let me just stop the current execution of application and let me just do npm install, because now we have added one dependency into the package.json, so we must have to use this npm install command. Now make sure you are again connected to the internet, because it is going to pull all the dependencies from the internet, and it is just going to use that dependency in our application. Now it might take a minute or one, but till now let me just do one thing. Let me just go to my notes again and let me just copy this particular line. So all these lines that whatever I'm using, I'll just give you in the description box. You can just directly copy and paste in your application directly. Now let me just copy this particular line, and yes, now our dependency is installed. Let me just copy this particular line. Let me just go to the index.html file, and then let me just do one thing. Let me just paste it after this line number 10. So make sure that whatever you have copied, whatever script you have copied, you are just pasting it into a head in something like this. And now let me just save these changes. Let me just start my application again. npm run start, something like this. And then let me just do one thing. Let me just go to the byproduct.component.ts. Over here, now what we have to do is we have to create one more method. So this particular method that we are just going to create, it is basically for opening the pop-up or opening a transaction prompt. I'll just show you what do I mean by that. So what we have to do is, let me just give the name as open transaction model, something like this, and it is going to take response or maybe anything. So whatever response we will receive, we will just send it as a parameter over here. So over here what we have to do is we can just take response which is of type any. As of now, I'm just going to keep it as a any. So now what we have to do is, over here we have to prepare one option. So it is nothing but basically it is something similar like we send headers in a different APIs, right? So it is basically similar to that. So we have to prepare these particular options. So what we have to do is we have to use one variable of type var, and let me just give the name as a options. Now we have to give different options over here. Make sure that you are not doing any mistakes. Just make sure that you are, whatever I'm writing, just you are writing in a pretty similar way over here. So first of all, what we have to do is we have to just use order underscore id. That is the first option that we have to give. Over here we have to give order id. So order id we will receive in the response. So we have to use response dot order id, something like this. So response dot order id, something like this. Then we have to give a key. So key again we will receive from the response. So we have to give response dot key. And if you just see okay, so as of now we don't have the key over here, but let's see how we can add that particular key. So if I just go to the IntelliJ, and if I just go to the, okay, so from over here we are not adding key over here. Let me just do one thing. Let me just create one more variable, because key is really very important part, so we require that key. So let me just use private string key, something like this, and let me just remove this constructor, and let me just generate new constructor. Let me just copy all these variables, and similarly let me just generate a getter setters also. Yes, and now let me just save these changes. Let me just go to the order detail service. Now over here we are just getting the error. So we have to just pass one more variable at the end, which is nothing but a key, and key we have already declared over here, something like this. And let me just restart the application, and let me just take a moment, and let me just test this application on a Postman first. Let me click on send. Yes, now we are receiving the key also. So this is the key that we have to use, and we have to make it as a response.key. Then third one that we have to use is use as amount. So we have to use response dot amount, something like this. After that we have to use a currency. So we have to use a currency. Make sure you are not doing any spelling mistakes, and we have to just use response dot currency, something like this. After that we have to give a name. So this name is basically a name of the person who is going to make a payment, or any name that you just want to display. So as of now I'm just going to make it as a learn programming yourself, something like this. After that we have to give a description. So description, you can give any description. So description should be like a string, and it should be something like payment of online shopping, something like this. You can give any description, by the way. The next thing that you can give is you can give any image. So I'll just show you like what this image is basically all about, but you can just give URL of any particular image. So let me just do one thing. Let me just go to the Pixabay. So let me just do one thing. Let me just go to the Pixabay, and let me just copy a dummy image. Let me just do one thing. Let me just copy, okay, URL of maybe any image. So let me just do one thing. Let me just copy this particular copy image address, and let me just paste it over here in a single quotes, something like this. After that, the most important part is a handler. So we have to give a handler, because once like transaction is done, then what is the method, what is the action that you have to perform, we have to give it in a handler. So for this handler, I'm just going to use one callback. So it will be of type like we will receive some response once our transaction is done. So that response will be of type any. Then we have to just give a curly bracket, and then what we can just do is we can create one new method like process response, something like this, and this process response will take one parameter, let's say resp, something like this. And let me just do one thing. Let me just use console dot log resp, something like this. And this particular method we will call from our handler. So we can just use this dot process response, and we can just pass whatever response that we will receive. We can just pass that response over here as it is. Now there are few more things that we can just do, that we can just pass, though there is one more option that is called as a prefill. So I'll just explain you what is the prefill and all about. And let me just do one thing as of now. Let me just use prefill, and inside the prefill we can just pass a name. So let me just give the name as, let's suppose, LPY, which is learn programming yourself. Email, let me just give LPY at gmail.com, and the third one is a contact. So let me just give it as a contact, and let me just give some random contact over here, something like this. There is one more option after the prefill, which is called as a notes. So let me just use that also. I'll just explain you, I'll just show you directly on the UI like what is all these things all about. Address, might be you can just give anything. So address is nothing but a online shopping, something like this, something like this. And there is one more option that is called as a theme. So that theme is nothing but you can just give a color of model that you want. So let me just give the color as COLOR, as you can just give any color code. Let me just maybe give one thing, hash, okay, so let me just give this random color name. I'm not sure which color it will pop up, so I'll just keep it as it is. And now let me just save these changes. Now the next thing that we have to do is, after preparing these options, we have to create one Razorpay object. So how we can create it? We have to just use new Razorpay, and we have to pass the options that we have created over here, something like this. Now it will return us one object. Let me just store it into a Razorpay object is equals to something like this. Now over here it is giving us one issue. Let's see what it is giving. So it is basically, okay, so what it is basically saying that argument of type is not assignable. Okay, key ID is declared. Okay, I'm not sure. Okay, let me just do one thing. Let me just remove this Razorpay config, something like this. And okay, okay, we can't remove it. Is the Razorpay class, so we can't remove it. So what it is basically saying that, I'm not sure. Let me just make it as a don't save. Okay, let me just remove this particular line also, and let's see now how it looks like. Let me just import it again, something like this. Yes, now it is looking perfectly fine. And let's see whether do we get any error. So as of now we are getting one error, but I think we should restart the application and then error will be resolved. One more thing that we have to do is we have to just call Razorpay object dot open. So we have to just call Razorpay object that open, something like this. And now let me just save these changes. Now over here again we are getting one error. So for this error, what we can just do is we can just go to the top and then we can just use declare, then var, and then we can just use Razorpay, which is of type any, something like this. And now let me just save these changes. Now over here let me just comment out this particular line. Let's see what happens. Yes, now let me just save these changes and let me just restart my application. Npm run start. Let's see what happens. Do we get any error or maybe any something new that we have to handle? So let me just wait till my application gets compiled successfully. Yes, now it is compiled successfully. Let me just go to the UI. Let me just refresh the application. Let me just go to the any product buy now. Let me just fill some details. As of now I'm just filling some random details. And now let me just open the console also. So if at all we get any error, then we should get it on the console. Okay, now let me just click on the place order button. Let's see what happens. Okay, so our prompt is not getting opened successfully, so we are not getting the model that we are expecting over here. So let me just click on it again, or let me just close it and let me just try to click on it again. Okay, so still we are not able to open the prompt. Let me just do one thing. Let me just go back, and yes, so over here we haven't called our method. So let me just copy it and let me just call it as a this.open transaction model, and then we have to pass the response, something like this. Let me just save these changes again and let me just wait till my application compiled. Let me just refresh it. Let me just give some name. Something like this, and let me just now click on the place order button. Let's see what happens. Yes, now if you see, we got the pop-up and we got the model. If you just see whatever name we have given, that name is basically popped up over here. Whatever image address that we have given, that image is populating over here. Now in India we have different options to pay. We have the Google Pay, we have the Phone Pay, Paytm. That is the reason we are getting all these options over here. Then we are getting the QR code also, and then we are getting some other like other payment ways, like we are getting the card and net banking and wallet also. So now next question comes in mind is how to test this particular transaction. So now in order to test this transaction, Razorpay itself have given different UPI IDs, and with the help of those UPI IDs we can test this particular transaction. I will give that document link in a description box to that Razorpay document. You can just check and you can just see what are the different ways to test it. But I have just noted them out, and if I just go to the IntelliJ and if I just open this application properties, then let me just copy this UPI ID. So this is nothing but success@Razorpay. So this is just test UPI IDs, it is not actual the UPI IDs. If I just click on UPI or QR, then let me just click on UPI ID and let me just paste it over here. And now let me just try to click on Pay Now button. But before that, let me just try to open the console, so that whatever we are just trying to print on the console, let's see what we what it exactly pays, what it exactly prints on the console. So if I just go to the VS Code, then if I just go to the TS file of by product.component.ts, then if you just see in the handler, what we are just doing is we are just calling this process response method, and we are just doing the console.log response, something like this. And now let's see, let me click on the Pay Now button, let's see what happens. So it is now doing some processing of the payment and it is just doing some actions, but we have to just wait. And now if you just see, we got the message like payment successful, and on the console, yes. So as soon as pop-up as soon as the pop-up closed, then we got some information on the console. So we got the order ID, we got the payment ID, alongside we got the payment signature. So we got three different things on the console. We are interested in the payment ID because we are going to store that in our database. So payment signature is also really very important, but as of now we are not doing any actual payments. That is the reason I'm just going to ignore it, but I'm just going to store this payment ID, or you can say transaction ID, in my database. So let's see how we can quickly do these also. So what we have to just do is we have to just copy this key. So let me just copy this Razorpay underscore payment underscore ID, and let me just come back to the VS Code. And over here, what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to check if response dot Razorpay underscore payment underscore ID. Okay, so what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to check if response not equals to null and response dot Razorpay payment ID not equals to null. If both are not equals to null, then and only then I'm just going to call this method, that is process response. Or else if something is null, then I'm just going to use alert, and I'm just going to show the message like payment failed, something like this. Let me just save these changes. The next thing that we have to do is we have to just place the order, because as of now whatever we have done is it is all about the payment. Now actually once the payment is successful, we have to place the order as well, right? So now let's see how we can do this. Again, we have done every single thing previously itself. We have already done one method that is called as a place order method. So we have to call this place order method itself, nothing more than that. But one more thing that we have to just do is we have to, okay, so for this create transaction and place order, what we are just doing is we are just calling this order, we are just taking one parameter that is called as order form. That parameter I'm just going to pass it for my open transaction model also, something like this. Again, we have to just add that parameter over here also, ng form, something like this. And then next thing that I'm just going to do is I'm just going to copy it, and I'm just going to pass it for my process response also, something like this. And again, we have to just add it in the parameter, something like this. And now let me just do one thing. Let me just copy, let me just cut this line, and let me just do one thing. Let me just call this dot place order, and now it is asking me for the order form. So let me just pass the order form, that whatever we are receiving in the parameter over here, something like this. Now one more thing that we have to do is we have to, like, whatever transaction ID we are taking, we have to store that transaction ID into the order details. So if I just show you on line number 20, there is one object, or maybe there is one you can just say that yes, there is one information object that is called as a name, address, contact number, alternate contact number. So these all the details are nothing but the details that we are just showing on this particular screen. So these are the details which are getting stored into these particular fields, and this particular order and quantity list is nothing but this particular list that we are preparing over here. So in this order details we have to store a transaction also, because that transaction we want to pass it to the backend, and then we have to like store it into a database also. So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to add one more field over here. So inside the order details interface, let me just add one more field that is called as a transaction ID, which is of type string again. And now let me just save this. Again over here, what we have to do is we have to just add the transaction ID. I will be initializing it with the empty string, something like this. Now the next thing that we have to do is we have to come back to the process response, and then inside this process response, what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to make it as this dot order details dot transaction ID is equals to resp dot, and let me just copy the key, which is Razorpay underscore payment underscore ID, and let me just paste it over here, something like this. And now let me just save these changes. Now let's see what actually goes to the backend and how it looks like basically from the network tab. So let me just click on save button again, and if I just come to the Google Chrome, let me just open the inspect, and let me just open the network tab. Yes, so over here inside the network tab, let's see what is the data that actually goes to the backend. Let me just put some random names over here. Okay, so now we are making the payment of 1150. So let me click on place order again. We have to give the UPI ID. So let me just copy this particular UPI ID and let me just paste it over here, something like this. And now let me just clean my network tab and let me just click on pay button. So there are different things happening behind the scenes. So let's see what happens exactly when we try to place the order. Now order is now payment is successful. Let's see order when order gets placed. Okay, so if you just see in our case, if I just show you place order, yes, so inside the place order, inside the payload, our transaction ID is going. So if you just see this is the API that is getting called to place the order, localhost :9090/place order/true, and then we have the contact number, full address, full name, and we have the order product quantity list also, and then lastly we have the transaction ID also. Yes, now we are able to send this transaction ID successfully to the backend. The only one thing that we have to do is we have to store it into a database, right? So let's see how we can store it into a database. So if I just go to the IntelliJ again, so one thing that we have to do is we have to just go to our order detail controller. So place order is the API that gets called. So we have order input. So inside the order input we have to add one more field that is called as a private string transaction ID. Make sure whatever transaction ID, whatever key you have used over here inside your order detail interface, whatever ID, whatever key you have used over here, make sure that you are just giving exact same ID over here also. Let me just generate the getters and setters. Let me click on OK. Let me just save it. Now let me just go to the controller and let me just go to the place order method. Now over here, if you just see, there is one more object that we are preparing that is called as order detail, and this order detail we are just storing into a database, right? If you just see, we are just storing order details into a database. So these order details, inside these order details we have to add one more field. So how we can add this? It is basically simple. We have to just go to the order detail. If you just see, order detail is nothing but an entity, right? So we have to add one more. What we have to do is we have to just add one more like field over here, that is private transaction ID, private string transaction ID, something like this. Let me just generate a getter setters, and let me just remove this particular constructor. So let me just generate a new constructor, something like this, and let me just generate a getter setters for a transaction ID also. So let me just click on getter setters and let me click on OK. And now let me just save these changes. Obviously we are getting some errors over here, so this is really very simple. What we have to just do is we have to just use order input dot get transaction ID, something like this. And now let me just save these changes. So over here again it is complaining me for something. Let's see what is happening over here. Okay, so if I just come to the order detail, yes, so what we just did is we don't have to include this order ID into a constructor. Let me just remove this constructor again. Let me just click on generate constructor and let me just select all, but let me just unselect this order ID and let me click on OK. Let's see what happens now, whether our error gets resolved or not. Yes, now our error is getting resolved. Now let me just restart the application and let me just take you to the database also, because this time we are expecting some changes into a database structure. Let's see whether my application started successfully. Yes, it is started. If I just refresh it and if I just show you the table, if I just show you the order detail table, so inside the order detail table we got one new column that is called as a transaction ID, right? So let's see, by placing one new order over here, if I just go to the home page, let me just select this buy now and let me just place some details over here, then contact number, something like this. And if you just see, the total is 909. Let me just click on place order. Let me just click on UPI ID. Let me just copy the UPI ID. Let me just open application property file. Let me just copy it and let me just paste it over here. Let me click on pay now. Let's see what happens. Yes, payment is successful. If you just see the messages, it is giving some messages. Yes, now your order is placed successfully and it will get delivered to you within the 4 to 5 business days, right? So now let me just refresh this particular again, and if I just show you, let's see whether a transaction ID is stored. Yes, if you just see, the transaction ID is stored and the amount was 909 and transaction ID is stored into a database, right? Now let me just do one thing. Let me just check this particular with a cart, because if you just see, we have a cart also, and if we have the multiple cart items, let's see how it behaves. Let me just go to the view details. Let me just add it to the cart. Let me just go back. Let me just add it to the cart, and then let me just go back and let me just add it to the cart. And one more item, let me just try to add it to the cart. Yes, now we have 4 items. If I just go, yes, okay, so we have multiple items in my cart. And let me just try to do one thing. Let me just try to click on checkout. If you just see, the grand total is 12,426. We can change a quantity also. If you just see, now the grand total is 14,826. Let me just put some details over here, something like this, and let me just try to click on place order. Let's see what happens. Now again, if you just see, it is taking the grand total as 14,826, which is exactly same that we have calculated behind the scenes. Let me just click on UPI enter UPI ID. Let me just copy the UPI ID. Let me just paste it. Let me click on pay now, and let me just wait till the transaction gets successful. So yes, transaction got successful and it is redirecting. Now we got the message, and now let me just select from the database table again, and if I just show you, yes, now we got the different orders placed over here, and if you just see, we are able to store the transaction ID for each of the different orders that we have placed just now. So this transaction ID will be the single, like will be the same for cart, because like whatever cart items we were having, like for this all the cart items we done only one transaction. That is the reason for all these order details we will be having only one transaction ID, right? So we are getting the expected output. It is working perfectly fine in our uh, single product checkout, in our cart product checkout also. So yes, it is working perfectly fine and as expected. So again, one more thing that we have just left back is might be this particular page is not working as expected. So I was supposed to it was supposed to like go to the next page, and it was supposed to show only one message over here, and it was supposed to vanish this particular like form. Let's see if it is a quick fix, then we will just try to fix it in this session itself, or else I'll just tell you how we can fix this into a next session. So if I just go, okay, so navigate, order confirm. Okay, so I think the code wise it looks perfectly fine. I'm not sure like why our form is not able to reset, and why we are not able to go to the next page. Actually we are able to go to the next page, which is order confirm, but still our existing form is not getting vanished, or existing form is not getting flushed up. So we can see this in the next session. I just don't want to make this session large than this. So I hope you got the idea like how we can do the payment integrations. I know like this is a quite complex process, or might be like if you are complete beginner, then this might be a quite complex process for you. But trust me, if you just try to follow all the instructions that I have shown in this session, you will not face any error. You will just it will be a very smooth integration for you. If you still have any questions, let me know into a comment section, and I will try my best to help you out in that case. I hope you enjoyed this session, and I'll see you in the next session.